This is a talk about career management for you guys, for software engineers, for individual contributors, but why should you even listen to us? So just a few words about ourselves. So I'm Josef Goldstein. I'm an R&D manager at Wix. I've been in software for about 15 years by now, out of which almost a decade doing, well, management.
And I'm David. I'm a software engineer at Meta. And out of the 25-ish years or so, most of them I spent as a software engineer, as an individual contributor, with a disastrous try of being a manager, which I luckily avoided eventually. Yeah.
So actually, the idea for this talk was founded between the two of us in Build Stuff last year. So like we owe credit to Build Stuff like twice for being here today and speak about this. So it's really, really awesome. But why are we really having this talk? We are having this talk because we like coffee. Now, let me explain that. I'm not talking about the coffee outside. That one's great. Specifically, what we like is having coffee with our friends, with our coworkers, people that are working in this industry. And during these coffee breaks, one-on-ones, beer breaks, there's always a subject that keeps popping up. And people are asking us for like advice on how to progress their career. Like, okay, I'm here right now, but like, what am I supposed to do to get to the next stage? And then obviously the first thing that I ask is it about money? I mean, don't get me wrong, I like money. David, do you like money?
I like money.
We like money. But really it's more than that, right? When you talk to people and you kind of understand is that like everyone is reevaluating their career decision at any given point in time, right? So maybe we're not happy with what we did so far. Maybe we are happy, but we're trying to kind of understand, okay, like this is cool, but how am I supposed to going further than that? It's a lot about expectations, right? It's our expectations from ourselves primarily about how we want to see ourselves in our career. But it's also, more importantly, the expectations of people that are around us, right? So our peers, our managers, our company. When we think about our career progression, about our growth, there's really no set guidelines. There's no like one standard way. Everyone's using a different language when they're talking about this. There's just a lot of titles, a lot of abstract concepts. And probably the most abstract concepts of all that somehow we keep using more and more is the concept of seniority.
So the seniority thing, as Joseph said, it keeps coming up a lot, right? And it's actually reflected in the way we talk about how we evaluate engineers. We distinguish ourselves by inferring some level of seniority. Maybe I'm a junior software developer or a senior software developer, and there's presumably something in the middle, like a middle software developer, middle engineer, or experienced software engineer. And then, if you survive long enough in the industry, maybe you get to be more than that. Maybe you get to be a staff engineer or a principal engineer and a bunch of other titles with the word engineer in them. And the biggest problem with all of these is it implies something that is only relevant for however that particular company interprets the title, right? I've had experiences with people who all see themselves as senior engineers who had wildly different skill levels and abilities, but they all use this label of ex-engineer or senior, junior, whatever it is, and there's really no common standard. And this goes back to what Joseph said about language. We don't have a unified language to talk about career progression. Now, the other thing that using the word seniority kind of implies is that there's a time scale, right? It implies time. Someone who's senior has spent more time. And it's kind of this idea sort of leads to the conclusion that if you just survive long enough, you magically become a senior engineer. And then if you survive a few years longer, you become whatever the company defines next, a principal engineer, whatever it is. And that leads to a lot of false narratives around how you progress, right? It ties things to time rather than individual skills and other things, which are actually much more important for engineers to progress. So the question, of course, is if you spend 10 years, right, working as a software engineer, does that automatically make you a senior engineer? And is your career linear? So the biggest, I think, limitation engineers often place on themselves is seeing their career as a linear progression from one thing to another. And there are implies there are discrete steps that if you just take all of them, you will end up being whatever the highest level you can imagine in your company or in the industry, senior engineer, principal engineer, architect, whatever label you give it. And there's only one way to go. And until recently, it was also a very common pattern to think of that this linear progression always leads towards management. You become a senior engineer and you spend some more time and you get some experience, and then you become a manager. And that's how you progress. And I think this is a very odd and incorrect way of seeing progression for most engineers. Most engineers don't really become managers. Does it mean they fail to progress? They just stop progressing at some point? The answer, of course, is no. Of course, your career doesn't stop. So let's talk about, what better ways we can use to define how our career progresses that isn't just leading from senior engineer to manager, and that's it.
So we were kind of thinking about, okay, we need a new vocabulary, right? Okay, so all those titles of seniority, they change from company to company. We tell it to someone, it's meaningless. But what other vocabulary can we offer to people? And because David and I are geeks, we thought about role-playing games, fantasy role-playing games, right? D&D or the computer type, right? Because when you think about your career in terms of, role-playing game, a fantasy role-playing game, usually what you're developing is you're developing your character, your hero, right? And when you think about how that happens, like how many people here are playing, role-playing games or computer games? Okay, so we have a fair amount of geeks here. That's good. We like you. We also like the rest. It's never linear, right? It's not like there's just one way that you can build a character, and there's one type of skill that you invest in, and it's just that way, right? When you think about role-playing fantasy games, there's actually various types of classes, of archetypes, and you kind of need to choose what you want to specialize in. And based on what you choose that you want to specialize in, you need to think about different skills and abilities that you need to invest in, right? Because those are the skills and abilities that will help the type of character that you want to build. And that's very similar to the way we kind of think about our career, right? Where do we want to take our career hero, if you wish? So if we start using that vocabulary and we start thinking, okay, what are the important abilities? Like, what are the dimensions that we want to think about when we are building our career, our character? Then we chose 5 to talk about today.
So first of all, there's obviously going to be more than 5, right? We have to limit ourselves to 5 because we see those as the main ones, but everyone will have a different set of skills. But because we have to limit ourselves, the first one we have to talk about, of course, is just like in computer games, it's experience. Not in the sense of you kill a dragon, you get this many skill points in JavaScript, but in the sense of how is it that we define our experience as engineers, as software developers? And there's a lot of, again, misconceptions about the way you look at experience. It's enough to look at any kind of job applications and see things like you must have X many years of experience in this technology or that technology, which seems to, again, imply that the number of years, it defines your ability with that skill. And it's broadly reasonable to assume, but it's not actually correct. And also, it hides the fact that experience isn't uniform. If you spend 10 years writing the same application in the same language, using the same tools for 10 years in a row, do you have as much experience and ability as someone who spent those 10 years writing 10 different things in 10 different frameworks and languages and got much broader experience in many different technologies? It's not the same thing. Having 10 years of one thing is not the same as having 10 years of varied experience and more depth and breadth in your skills. So on the practical level, this is something we need to think about when we think of careers as a dimension. We need to set ourselves a goal. What is it? What kind of experiences we want to grow in, and what are the expectations from the industry, from our company, from our managers of how we progress our experience. Of course, it's not always possible to do that because you work for a specific company which uses specific tools. But in general, we do need to stop and think of what are we doing? Where is our experience growing towards? Right. Now, the next dimension that's important to talk about is scope. And scope is something that is kind of orthogonal to experience, which is what is the size of problem we can tackle, right? What are the kinds of things that we can produce? And obviously, as we develop and build new skill sets and grow as engineers, the kind of problem we can solve and the size of the problem, the scope of the problem we can solve grows with us, right? And roughly speaking, There's actually a really excellent YouTube talk that both Joseph and I really like from Randall Kutnick from Netflix, and he talked about like these three broad bands of scope that engineers can find themselves in, where the first one would be a solution implementer. If you're just junior and you're starting out in the industry, your primary ability is going to be implementing specific solutions, right? You have a well-defined task, something you need to express as code, and your contribution is to solve problems that are easy to solve with code. And of course, as you grow in skills and you build your experience, the size of the problem that you can solve and implement increases. And eventually you find yourself in a place where you're not able to just solve specific problems that somebody else defined for you, but rather you can take a more amorphous abstract problem that nobody solved for you and actually go and find the solution, go and become a problem solver, someone who can take a large domain and understand it and figure out what the issues are, create solutions, break it down into individual sub-problems, and engage other solution implementers to help them actually solve the problem. And if you do that long enough and you build, again, your experience and other dimensions we'll talk about, you will find yourself in the problem finder area, which is a much more abstract area where you don't just work on a specific problem, you're the one who actually defines what is a problem that's worth solving. You define the edges of the problem and you convince the rest of the organization and business that this specific problem is worth solving as opposed to a different problem, which is less important. And then you engage other problem solvers or you solve the problem yourself, and eventually it just cascades into someone who goes and codes the task. Ideally, when you find yourself being a problem finder, you don't magically forget being an implementer. You still, you have the entire pyramid of skills below that. You don't just do one thing, but the expectation is that you can be handed a broad area of responsibility and you will be the person who finds what needs to be worked on and what needs to be solved, right? And usually this comes with titles like architect or tech lead or CTO, right? And those are domains of the problem finder, right? Now, the third dimension, it's important to talk about for individual contributors in particular, is impact. Impact, like in Meta, where I work, impact is a magical word. Everyone is very focused on defining what is their impact, how they're impacting. And I suspect it's not unique just to Meta. I think looking for impact is kind of a broad concept throughout the industry. Joseph, is this the same thing in Wix as it is everywhere else?
It is. And the idea of impact is ubiquitous, even if a company does not use this term directly, right? Because what is impact, right? So the way I envision it in my head is like these dominoes, right? In which eventually you're coding, right? You're solving a problem through coding, right? But what you choose to solve and the way you choose to solve it will vary greatly in terms of the type of impact that you're going to create. So knowing how to create impact means choosing the right piece of domino that, if hit, will create a cascading effect, an increasing cascading effect of value. So another way of thinking about it is we are all gotten used to using the term the 10x engineer. Everyone here heard the 10x engineer by now, right? So what is the 10x engineer? Is the 10x engineer a person that's writing code 10 times as fast? Is the 10x engineer a person that runs 10 times more code? Maybe. A better way of looking into it is a 10x engineer is someone that is able to solve a problem that will bring 10 times more value down the road, right? That is impact. Now, that obviously changes the more your career progresses, right? You're expected to bring various amounts of impact by better understanding the business, right? And that's why it's so tricky, right? Because creating value is not something that you just solve by writing good code, right? Clean code will not lead to bringing actual value, will not lead to bringing impact. It comes from understanding the environment that you operate in, the company that you're working in, where is the value coming from, and how can you take the experience that you have and the scope in which you are operating and bring substantial more amount of value, of impact than someone else. Now, when we talk about impact, eventually there's a certain cap to that, and that leads to the next dimension, which is influence. Now, I know what you're thinking. Most people see influence and they're like, oh, management, right? But really, yes. Influence is very important for management. That's kind of like a key dimension. It's a key skill for being a good manager. But when you think about it, influence is not only for managers, right? Influence is something that's critical for any type of senior role, any type of leadership role in the tech industry, right? When you think about it in the terms of impact, eventually there is a glass ceiling to the impact that you personally can create as an individual, right? And that glass ceiling is based on what you personally can do with 10 fingers and 24 hours. Now, some people will spend all of their life optimizing what they can do with their 10 fingers or with their 24 hours. But breaking this glass ceiling actually depends on bringing other people to the table. And we do that using influence, right? We do that through leadership without authority, right? That's a term. You should Google that. That means that we are leading people after us without having any specific authority over them, without being their managers. Now, how are we doing that? We're doing it by bringing good ideas to the table. We're doing it by making our ideas viral, by convincing people that our ideas are good, the way that we want to do things are good. We do this by mentoring people, by taking the experience that we've collected, the scope that we operate in, and teach other people the stuff that they haven't learned yet themselves. So, in essence, it all comes down to how much are you a multiplier in your ecosystem? How much can you help others? How much can you bring others with you to bring that impact that you want, to utilize the experience that you've collected within the scope that you're operating, right? So, yes, influence does not necessarily mean management, but influence necessarily means leadership. And that leads us to the last dimension that we want to talk about. And it is, well, you can call it self-leadership, independence, right? So you have your experience, and there's the scope that you operate in, and the impact that you bring, and the influence that you're creating. But how much are you independent operating within all of those? How much are you independent growing yourself within those, right? And being independent does not mean not working with others, right? It's not contradictory to being an influencer, right? It means being self-sufficient. It's being able to get the help that you need, to get the influence that you need, to push whatever agenda that you have. And when you think about it, independence grows into larger scopes as your career progresses, because you're not expected only to affect yourself. Your own independence is also the people around you. And then it has to do with, okay, how much of the agenda that's currently on the table, how much of the things that you are personally currently doing are things that you came up yourself? How much of the things that your peers are working are things that you came up yourself? How much of the ideas that you are sharing with people, when you're mentoring them, when you're ideating through technological problems, how much of those are ones that you've incepted yourself, right? So that is independence, and that kind of wraps up the 5 dimensions that we wanted to talk about.
So, of course, there are more than 5, and it's important to understand, I think, that every person is going to have a unique mix of all of these dimensions for themselves, which are their comfort zone and their strengths and weaknesses. And it's important to stress that nobody is expected to be magically good at any of these. Each one of those is a progression that you will work on throughout your entire career, and you will continuously get better at them as you invest more in them. And it's very likely that nobody can be optimally good at every dimension we can imagine, unless you're a super unique genius, in which case, congratulations. But for most people, you will need to figure out what is it that you want to specialize in, what suits you personally, your strengths and your weaknesses, and whether you want to double down on your strengths or maybe make up for your weaknesses and improve those. And each one of those is something that you really need to invest time yourself into thinking, what is it what am I trying to achieve? What is the thing that's going to improve me and set me up better for the next stages of my career? I think it's very important for everyone to every now and then lift up their head from whatever daily routine they're going through and ask themselves, is what I'm doing right now, is what I'm focusing on right now, the thing that's going to move me towards where I want to be, in 5 years and 10 years? Where is my career going? And what are the different dimensions that I'm utilizing and I'm comfortable working on what are the things I should improve. Because oftentimes, and I see it from personal experiences, from other people I work with, we tend to get stuck in a certain routine. We have tasks and we have schedules and deadlines, and we're working on this annoying JavaScript application, and we've been working on this thing for 10 years. And it's important to stop every now and then and say, okay, am I trying to become the world's leading expert on JavaScript? I keep picking on JavaScript, by the way. It's not personal against JavaScript. It's a wonderful language and all that. It's just the go-to example. I apologize to any JavaScript developers in the audience. You're great. But like the important question to ask yourself is what I'm doing right now the thing that I'm actually implicitly aiming for, or is it just accidental because those are the tasks I get given? And if it's not something I'm trying to do, what are the things that I should try and change or try to improve in order to get to the next level or next progression point that I defined for myself, right? So what's important? So what is the language you want to define for setting up this target, right? And this brings us to this idea of archetypes, engineering archetypes. Just like Joseph was talking about with fantasy games, engineering archetypes are actually a term which is relatively common in large companies. At Meta, we have explicitly defined engineering archetypes where you can use as sort of a goal or as a shorthand to talk about. Of course, like any conversation about labels, these archetypes are made up, right? They're just conventions we define to give a label to a certain set of skills or a certain type of engineer. There's obviously going to be an infinite number of combinations, and so we can't have an infinite number of archetypes. So just remember that even though we define an archetype in some way, it doesn't mean that you have to do that specifically. The goal here is to define what is your archetype and what you're trying to achieve. But broadly speaking, we will be able to define certain broad categories of engineering efforts that you can aim towards, right? And the first one we want to talk about is the generalist. This is someone who specializes in a broad array of different technical skills and different technologies, and is able to contribute in the best way by being able to apply themselves to a wide variety of different problems. One of the biggest ways I see junior engineers hamstring themselves, right, and shoot themselves in the foot, is by defining themselves in terms of one specific technology or one specific language. Every time I hear someone say, I'm a C# developer or I'm a Java developer, I just want to tell them, no, stop being a C# developer. Be a software developer, be a broadly skilled engineer. It's not against C#. Again, wonderful language. I keep picking languages at random today, and I apologize to practitioners of those languages. You can be a wonderful C# developer, but just don't think of yourselves in terms of a narrowly defined specialization, right? The generalist is someone who can pick up new languages and quickly adapt themselves. And if you're in a small company and there's no DevOps and you need to solve something, the generalist will go and figure out how to write Terraform and set up some services, even though that's not one of their skills they had, because that's someone who will quickly adapt and broaden their experience. To be a generalist means earning a lot of broad experience and trying to expand the scope you can work on as much as possible so you can apply yourself to new problems. It necessarily means that you have to balance that versus being independent or being able to influence other people. Now, the opposite of that, or the other side of the scale from the generalist, is what's usually known as the code machine, someone who actually is a world-class expert in JavaScript. Those people exist, I guess. So I'm joking, but of course, that is someone who is focused on bringing impact and bringing value through writing code. This is the mythical 10x developer, the person who knows how to solve the most important problem in the org by writing code and just fixing it or developing it quicker than everyone else and better than everyone else. And this is something where, again, you need to figure out what are the important skills here, and those are going to be very different. For example, being able to increase your scope and figure out what is the impact will be much more important because you're trying to progress as a code machine, bring value through writing code. It's important to understand what Joseph was talking about with regards to impact, which is how do you identify the impact you want to be? The danger here is to be stuck with a small scope and working on a bunch of tasks which don't have as much impact for many years without actually progressing. So the progression as a code machine is something that requires improving your technical skills in a specific domain, but also improving your understanding of what are impactful problems to solve, right? And the next archetype that we want to talk about is kind of a higher level version of the generalist, which is the architect, right? Someone who has increased not just their experience broadly enough and increased the scope of the problem they can work on to be wide enough where they can actually reason about a whole software system and actually create value by working not just on specific coding tasks or specific elements of software, but rather on the trade-offs of the entire software system, right? Working on the design of the system, mentoring other people, helping their design, and being the person who is responsible for all the different trade-offs between maintainability and scale and cost and all of the different aspects of software systems, which are the domain of an architect. This is oftentimes a much progressed version of the generalist, someone who has broadened their experience to the point where the organization relies on them to actually own the whole domain and define what are the important problems to solve in a software domain. This is my archetype, right? So the architect, I'm an architect. I've spent pretty much the last decade working in different types of technical leadership roles, usually with the label architect on them. In Meta, there's no such thing. Everyone's just a software engineer. But internally, if I think of what is it that I do system architecture. And one of the issues in the industry is that the term archetype architect is used as a label of a specific job. And it's really not. It's more of a general archetype of engineers who create impact through this specific way, right? So I think one important way to figure out when you are the architect, or when you become this archetype, is imagine that you spent your entire day in meetings, not 24 hours, but like 10 hours at work, and all you did was go to meetings and talk to a bunch of people and decide a bunch of things. Is your attitude at the end of the day, shit, I went to a bunch of meetings, I got nothing done, I didn't write a single line of code? Or is your thought after that is, wow, I spent all my time in meetings today, I got so many things done, I made a lot of people agree with me, I progressed my plans, I created action and work for a bunch of other people, such a successful day, I got so much done. So if your attitude is the second one, you can see yourself being this archetype, someone who actually focuses on delivering impact through other people, through influencing them and figuring out what software is. If your attitude is the first one, it's likely that you're more comfortable being a code machine and being someone who actually works hands-on as opposed to through other people, right? And that's, again, just a very general high-level way of thinking of this as broad archetypes. You don't have to be one of those, right? I believe there are people who can write code wonderfully and also influence other people. It's not exclusive from one another. But again, this is just an example of the process you should go through mentally every now and then, every few months, every year or so, of trying to figure out what is it that you're trying to achieve. Are you going to be trying to be an architect, and those are the kind of jobs you want to work in? So then work backwards from that and figure out what are the dimensions I need to actually improve in or get good at to be a successful archetype. Or if you're comfortable as a coding machine, right? If that is your area of comfort, then what is it that you need to improve? And what other things you might have to give up, right? Because if you're specializing as something, it's very likely that you're not necessarily closing off opportunities for yourself, but you're optimizing for one thing, which means you're not optimizing for being an architect if you're specializing in being the world expert in PHP. And I actually write in PHP, so this is not personal against PHP. So finally, we can't ignore the elephant in the room, which is the last archetype.
I guess that's me. So we were kind of dissing management. And there's nothing wrong with being a manager. I chose to be a manager. I identify as a manager. And I made this choice kind of by accident almost. I kind of stumbled into becoming a manager almost a decade ago, and I found that I really like it. But one of the things that we need to ask ourselves is becoming a manager a promotion? Because as a person that's been doing it for a while, I can tell you this is not as much as a promotion as it's a career change. And I think that's one of the things that a lot of companies kind of get wrong in this, and making people think that the only way for them to grow is to becoming a manager, because this really is changing your position, right? So when I decided to go to management, I had to give up on a lot of stuff that I liked. I really liked writing code. I really liked building architecture. But when you're a manager, the focus is less about the software. The focus is about the people, right? You are not architecting software. You are architecting the culture of your engineering organizations. It's about having meaningful one-on-ones with people. It's about understanding their trouble and kind of figure out the bugs that exist in human communication, as weird as it is, right? And you don't do that through coding, or at least I haven't found a way yet. Being a good manager does require a lot of the dimensions that we talked about. Obviously, it requires a lot of influence, right? It requires a lot of independence, but those look kind of different, right? So scope looks different. Impact looks different when you're a manager. And there's nothing wrong with it, but it's not necessarily for everyone. And it is completely fine to try it out, right? Maybe your company is kind of pushing you to grow to be a manager, and maybe you can go for it. But it's always a good idea or to think about it and maybe take a step back. And really, when you zoom out, and we've described a bunch of archetypes here, and they're really not the only ones, right? But you really need to have one. You need to have a certain direction, and it doesn't mean if it's like one of the archetypes that we described, or an amalgam of them, or something completely different in your head. You need to have a certain direction to which you can compose your growth, right? How to compose all those dimensions of growth towards. And it is always okay to stop for a second and ask yourself, am I actually enjoying the thing that I'm doing right now?
So you might actually think it's facetious to ask yourself, am I enjoying this? This is work. You're not supposed to enjoy work. You go there to get money so you can buy food and shelter. But we are lucky enough to work in an industry where it's actually reasonable to have choice and to expect to like your work and enjoy your work and kind of build yourself towards something that you enjoy doing, right? And for me, it was actually a very important step because I've been a developer for 25-ish years or so, right? And 20 years ago, there really wasn't an understanding in the industry that management is not a promotion, right? And one of my goals when I was, roughly 5 years-ish of experience as a senior developer, newly promoted senior developer, my next goal was, of course, to become a team lead, being a manager. That was the one career path that everyone looked at. And I worked very hard to become a manager, even though in hindsight, I was very much unsuited for it. I ignored anyone who told me that I probably wouldn't enjoy being a team lead, including people from HR and my own manager. And eventually I switched companies and I went to a company that was willing to give me a chance to become a team lead. I got a team of 3 people and myself, not a very large team. And everything I had to do as a manager, I didn't like. None of the things that I was expected to do were things I enjoyed working on. One-on-ones with people are fun if you're talking about life stuff, but it's not fun if you need to give them negative feedback and try to make them improve. And keeping schedules and tracking times and all the things Joseph talked about, which he actually for some reason enjoys, I hated every single one of them. It was the most unhappy I've been throughout my entire career for a year and a half until I finally broke down and I left and I became a software consultant, which was like the furthest thing I can imagine from being a manager. And I've never tried doing anything like that since. Obviously, I moved towards leadership roles because that's what I do. And I figured out that there is actually a big difference between using influence to create value and being a manager. There is 2 completely separate career trees that you don't have to go into management. And I think the industry now is much more aware of this distinction, and it's not like the only career path available. But I've experienced it personally, and I think asking yourselves, am I enjoying this? Is this going to lead somewhere that I want to go? Is a crucial question to ask yourself every few months, every year or so, as you think of, what is it you want to do next? What is the next job you want to take? Right.
So let's say that you're bought in, right? Let's say that you're bought into the vocabulary that you have your archetype or archetypes that you want to grow into, and you have a rough idea of what are the dimensions that you need to grow in together, right? So in the world of role-playing, you have your character sheet, you have a strategy. But now we need to take it to the real world, right? And in the real world, you also need to know how to play the game. And in our case, the real world is the company that we work in, our managers, right? We need to understand how our company, how our manager views career progression, how our manager views the levels or the expectations within them. And in every company, that might be a little different, right? So some companies might actually have one of these, right? So this is an actual career ladder from a company called Rent the Runway. They became very famous for open sourcing this. They actually are also using some terminology from the world of role-playing game, which is cute. And it's very straightforward, right? You have the levels of becoming an engineer, and then each one of the columns are a specific skill, and then you can go and you can just read what does it mean in that specific role that you want, and if you want to progress to the next level, then it says what it is that you're supposed to be doing. Some companies will even take this a step further, and they will actually take time to explain the multiple paths that you can take in your career growth, whether it's through archetypes or just showing that there is another career ladder that's happening in parallel to the management one, and this is completely fine. Some companies will have very vague goals on what it is that you need to achieve, and some companies are going to be very, very specific about like what are the KPIs that you need to meet in order to get to the next level. And in some companies, it will look more like this. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that there's anything wrong in your company. So if your company doesn't have a career ladder, that's not necessarily a big deal. In Wix, for example, we don't actually have a career ladder. And there's a few reasons to why your company won't have a career ladder. The first one is, the company is just small. So most like small startups, they don't have the need to come up with something of this sort. Or maybe they just have different problems to deal with instead of investing in this. In other companies, the company might choose to avoid the idea of levels and titles because while they do give a lot of clarity and direction to people, they also bring a lot of bad stuff. They bring a lot of office politics, and they bring a lot of people just fighting over things that maybe we shouldn't be fighting over during our work. But don't be wrong, right? Even if your company does not have its ideas of levels and expectations just written down in a website public for everyone to see, those exist. They exist de facto in the company's culture and in the brain of your manager. And it is your job as the ones taking ownership over your growth to understand how your company and your manager perceive growth in that company. So how do we do that? We have a conversation. If you don't have one already, you set up a one-on-one with your manager because you really should have one. And you set expectations. You tell your manager about that new vocabulary that you learned, about those weird archetypes that you might want to aim in, and the dimensions you want to grow in. And you try to build a bridge between understanding how your manager or your company's views growth to potentially how you see your growth and where you want to go to. You want to create a joined language. And once you have this joined language, then, okay, it's time to start planning ahead. And the only way of doing it is getting feedback. Now, feedback can be scary for a lot of people. It's kind of just getting the truth in your face. It's literally asking your manager, like, what do you think about me? And you might be pleasantly surprised. You might find that you are better at things than you personally think, because we all have imposter syndrome. But you might also find that things that you think you are very proficient in, you might need to have some more work done on that. And you should be open for getting this criticism, for getting this feedback. Because feedback is the first step for building a plan, for building a roadmap. Because what you actually want to do is to build for yourself, but together with your manager, with your company, a growth roadmap for yourself. How do you get from where you are today to where you want to be 6 months from now, or a year, or 5 years, or 10 years from now? What are the dimensions that you need to work on? Where are your strengths? Where are your weaknesses? And this is not just one conversation. This is a continuous conversation. Open a document. Create a shared document between you and your manager. Write down the things that you want to accomplish. Write down the things that you should be doing in order to get to where you want to get. Set up KPIs. How will you measure success? In 6 months from now, how will you know that you made any progress? It sounds really simple. Just write a document and write it down. But like Most people just don't do that. And it's a continuous conversation. You need to get back to it over and over again and see whether you are going in the right direction, whether you need help, and whether you're doing what you are supposed to be doing.
So what we've talked about so far, it makes it sound like everything is on you. You're responsible. And yeah, you are responsible for your career. It's your career. But I think just like the other dimensions we talked about, experience and scope, there's a growth ladder which happens in terms of owning your career. And I think early on in your career, it's very reasonable for your manager, your company, tech leads, mentors, whatever support structure you have in your company to do most of the heavy lifting in trying to help you along, give you feedback, help you learn, give you the skills and tools you want, and try to help you understand what scope is and what the impact you should be. And as you progress, as you grow as an engineer and you start developing your independence and you understand what scope means better and how to create impact, this kind of equation shifts, right? And you become more and more responsible for your own growth, right? When you're at a place in your career where I find myself in, for example, or Joseph, when you're relatively senior, you understand the business well, you know what your scope is, you're very experienced, it's very reasonable to expect you to do most of the heavy lifting, because from there, the growth also becomes very individual. The higher up you go in engineering skill, the more individual your growth path becomes to what you want to do. And so nobody else can actually tell you what to want. So the ownership of this career conversation moves to you more and more as you become more specialized and more advanced and more mature as an engineer, right?
So let's wrap things up, right? We talked all about a lot of stuff. Hopefully we've created some kind of nice vocabulary, but really, what can you do tomorrow? Or next week, because conference is a few more days. Think about the future. Think about your archetype. Right? It doesn't have to be the archetypes that we've set ourselves. Again, it can be an amalgam. It can be something completely different. But set a goal to where you want to be as an engineer 5 or 10 years from now. And it's fine. It's fine to change your mind. Like, this is not set in stone, but you need to have a certain direction, because this is the direction that you'll use to orient your growth dimensions. Think about the dimensions that we mentioned, and maybe a few that we didn't. Where are your strengths? Where are your weaknesses? Do you want to weigh on your strengths to be even stronger in them and build a career based on that? Or maybe you want to address some of your weaknesses that are holding you back from where you want to get to. And talk to your manager. Start that conversation. Set up a one-on-one. Tell them about what you heard, about what you understood, about what you want. Build a roadmap. Set the expectations. Get some feedback. And get working. And now, before we finish, it's really important to kind of say is that this is not only about you. I mean, don't get me wrong. Your career is 100% on you, and you're the ones that's responsible for it. But you are operating within an ecosystem. And a lot of the opportunities for growth depend on being recognized. They depend on having the right opportunities, of having the right timing. And those not necessarily are always there. You need to have the right ecosystem. You need to have the right manager that believes in you. And you need to have the company that has a cultural DNA that fits the one that you believe in, the one that will push you to where you want to get. And sometimes you will be doing everything right, but things will just not be happening because it's not the right ecosystem. And that's fine too. Sometimes it's okay to wait a little bit, and sometimes it's okay to maybe think about a different place.
So thank you very much. We're miraculously exactly on time. And if you want to reach us, you will have to reach Joseph, because my LinkedIn and email is obscured. Oh, thank you, control guys. And I can't be there physically with you to talk to you about careers, but Joseph is going to be there, and he's going to answer all of your questions really well.
A round of applause, Joseph and David. Thank you very much. Yes, let's get straight to the question. Yes.
Yes, so I have one question. So I always was struggling with doing concrete things while progressing in career path, and then at some point I don't know from where exactly, but I took some internet advice to basically impersonate the role that you're trying to achieve. So at some point I was senior engineer, and then we didn't have like tech leads and so on, and then I thought like, I want to be tech lead, and then I'm trying to think like, oh, what would tech lead do? And then I'm trying to pick the tags that would tech lead do, and so on. And eventually, I kind of become tech lead, and then there was a like other person hired for it eventually. But then when they left, I was kind of taking the job. So what are your thoughts on it?
I think this is a really great approach, right? So what you're talking about is, I don't want to use the term fake it till you make it because I don't think it's accurate. I think it's about identifying vacuums. Every company has vacuums. They have vacuums in leadership, they have vacuums in technical acumency. There's always vacuums, right? A lot of people just hope and wait for someone to kind of put a title on their head and then give them a set of responsibility, and that's how they get to where they want to get. And rarely does growth actually happen that way. The way it usually happens is that the title or the acknowledgement comes at the very end, right? So basically what you're describing is about identifying the vacuums that you want to fill in, right? So there's a vacuum of technical leadership. So, okay, how would a technical leader behave in this vacuum, right? We can't make technical decision making. No one is asking for doing like proper design reviews, right? Okay, so if there was a tech lead, which I would want to be, that's what that person would do, right? Why not do it right now? Right? So obviously there is sometimes friction because if people don't see you that way, if you're too far away from where you want to get, then maybe you'll get some pushback for like why is he setting a meeting to call me? Like why is he trying to make decisions? But more often than not, and this actually has to do a lot on feedback and understanding where you are, but more often than not, you might be even closer than you think to where you want to achieve. And then just utilizing that vacuum to make actions that push you into the type of responsibility that you want will get you faster. Right, so I think it's an amazing advice from you.
Great. Thank you for your question. Do we have any more? Yes, one more.
Yes, thank you both for your talk. I have a question. So how would you implement this for a freelancer? So you don't have a clear manager or it switches all the time. You are your own manager. How would you implement this?
So I think the answer is within the question, right? If you're a freelancer, you are your own manager. So get a mirror. But jokes aside, I think first you need to kind of think on where you're aiming, right, as a freelancer. So like, again, it's in terms of archetype. So like, how do you see yourself as a freelancer, 5 years from now? I think the most difficult thing to get as a freelancer is feedback, right? Because the people that are hiring you probably won't be wanting to spend time and give you feedback. But if you try to solicit it, you will eventually be able to get it. And that can be from whatever hire manager that hired you, that can be from your colleagues, that can be implicitly through the work, like understanding like how you're being perceived. And that can be the feedback loop for yourself to stand, okay, wait, so I'm perceived this way. This is where I want to be as a freelancer, right? So like, let's say I want to be a freelancer architect, and today I'm a freelance developer. And today, like, I don't feel like I can function in that role. Okay, so let's try to think of like, what am I doing on the day-to-day that's pushing me away from that? So it's a lot about trying to find, I would say, feedback, and it's 100% more difficult to do as a freelancer. But the rest is 100% on you. You are your own manager.